My dad cheated my mom, slept with our neighbor who framed me as her baby's father, until a DNA test exposed their lies and turned their lives into chaos. So I, 48 male, am in a really strange situation right now, so any advice and help is welcome. 18 years ago, my dad, who was 60 at the time, slept with his neighbor, who happened to be a 24-year-old woman. My parents' marriage was toxic at best, but my mom had never cheated on him even though she complained about him all the damn time, and he would crib about her as well. They were just not a good match, and I constantly wished they would separate because of the never-ending fights and arguments. Finally, my dad gave in and cheated with his neighbor, no less. Back when he slept with his neighbor, I must have been 30, and I was living by myself in an apartment. I'm an IT professional and could afford to live a nice life. So my dad approached me when his neighbor got pregnant to take care of it. I was disgusted to learn that he'd slept with someone so much younger than him, even younger than me, and that he cheated on Mom. I refused to be caught up in any of this, but he insisted and tried to convince me to take care of the baby by saying that I needed to consider it as repayment for everything that he'd done for me so far. I still said no and made him leave me alone by threatening to report him to the police for harassment if he visited me again for any reason at all. After that day, I decided to go no contact with him because this was just the last straw. I'd only kept in touch for my mom's sake because my dad was a downright awful person. But after she found out that her neighbor was having her husband's baby, she finally decided to pack her stuff up and leave. I don't even know why their neighbor was choosing to have a 60-year-old man's child when she herself was so young and had her whole life ahead of her, but I didn't bother to find out. I severed any and all ties with my father, and never heard from him again. After my mother's divorce from my father, she left the house we'd called home, severing ties with him completely. His whereabouts became a mystery to us both, as he faded into the background of our lives. 2 weeks ago, however, an unexpected visitor disrupted the quiet rhythm of my current existence. An 18-year-old young man appeared at my doorstep, his expression a mix of determination and uncertainty. Before I could even greet him, he asked to confirm my name and age, his tone insistent, as if he'd rehearsed this moment. Once satisfied with my identity, he declared that he'd finally tracked me down and that I could no longer evade my responsibilities. The word that stopped me cold was Dad. I'm a married man now, 15 years deep into a life with my wife, and we have a 1-year-old son who brings us joy every day. The idea of this stranger's claim reaching their ears filled me with dread. Instinctively, I stepped outside, gently closing the door behind me to shield my family from this bizarre encounter. I ushered the young man to a quieter corner of the porch, my mind racing to make sense of his words. He explained that his mother had told him about me, but she'd lost track of my whereabouts after I'd moved and cut off all contact with her. Now, armed with my address, he was here to demand what he believed I owed him, specifically the cost of his college tuition. He spoke with a conviction that left me momentarily speechless, even hinting at legal action if I didn't comply. For a fleeting moment, I was utterly bewildered, grappling with the absurdity of his accusation. Then he mentioned his mother's name, and the pieces began to fall into place. She was my father's former neighbor, a woman from a chapter of my life I'd long left behind. The truth hit me like a wave. This young man wasn't my son but my half-brother, the child of my father. For reasons I couldn't yet fathom, his mother had convinced him that I was his father, sending him to my doorstep to extract financial support. The audacity of the lie was staggering, and I felt a surge of frustration at being dragged into this mess. As we stood there, the young man's eyes burned with a mix of hope and defiance, clearly believing the story he'd been fed. I tried to remain calm, asking him to clarify details about his mother and their situation. He recounted how she'd raised him alone, always vague about his father until recently, when she pointed him toward me. The realization that my father's past had resurfaced in such a convoluted way was infuriating, yet I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for this kid, misled and caught in a web of deception. His threat to take me to court felt like a desperate grasp at securing his future, but it was misdirected, a product of his mother's misguided narrative. This encounter forced me to confront the tangled legacy of my father's actions. My half-brother's arrival wasn't just a personal inconvenience. It was a stark reminder of the chaos my father had left in his wake. I knew I had to tread carefully, not only to protect my family but also to unravel the truth for this young man. His future, like mine, had been shaped by the choices of others, and now we were both caught in the fallout. As I processed this, I felt a resolve to address this situation with clarity and compassion, ensuring that the cycle of misunderstanding and blame wouldn't continue to haunt us. Once I connected the dots, I was relieved that this wasn't actually my son, and I explained the situation to him, but he refused to believe me and said that he was not going to let me off the hook so easily. He wanted a paternity test to be conducted at a hospital of his choice, and I agreed to it readily since I had nothing to hide. The very next day, the paternity test was done, and needless to say, I was not his father. The poor guy was devastated when he realized I'd been telling him the truth. When he asked me where his real dad was, I told him that he'd have to ask his mother about that since I'd cut my own father off almost 2 decades ago. Then he told me that his dad had never played any role at all in his life, and had gone MIA even before he was born. According to what his mother had told him, she was a waitress and had worked really hard to raise and educate him all on her own, but unfortunately she didn't have enough savings to send him to college, and he wasn't willing to opt for a student loan. So he'd set out to find his father, but now he knew that his mother had lied to him about his real dad and had probably been too embarrassed to tell him the truth. I ended up feeling really bad for the kid, since he was just a couple of years older than my own son, and here he was struggling to think of a way to pay for college just because my horrible dad had decided to abandon his own child. So I told him not to worry and promised him that I'd put him in touch with my dad within a few weeks. I didn't know if I could do it, but I'd already promised him, so I got to work and even told my mom to help find him. She hadn't spoken to him in ages, and we weren't even sure if he was still alive or not. But my mom asked around the neighborhood they used to live in and found out that my dad had sold the house and moved to Missouri so that he could live on a farm with his family. I did some digging and found out where he lived, and since they had a business phone number on their website as well, a few days back, I decided to call that number and ask for my dad. Luckily, I did manage to get through to him and told him that he needed to get in touch with his son right away, or else I'd make sure that he'd be taken to court and forced to pay up. My dad told me to stay out of his business and then disconnected the call, but I forwarded that number to my half-brother and left him to deal with the situation. I also came clean to my wife about this and told her all about my half-brother because I really wanted him to be a part of my life now. The poor guy has been through a lot, and I would be more than happy to be able to do something for him. It's not his fault. His father's an awful person, and he doesn't deserve to be treated like this. My wife already knew about the kind of guy my dad was and his affair with a neighbor since I'd told her about it. But now that she knew my half-brother had reached out to me, she was thrilled for me and reassured me that he'd get all the help that he needed. We've kept in touch since, and he's told me that when he confronted his mother about her lie, she got very upset with him for even trying to go searching for his dad when she specifically told him not to. They'd been fighting for a few days over this, but 3 days ago, once I'd given my half-brother our dad's contact info, he decided to call him and talk to him, but my dad, being the coward that he is, refused to speak to him. I guess he must have complained to his mother because, that very day, they got into a really bad fight, and my half-brother ended up getting kicked out over his insolence, all because he wanted to find out where his father was and make him pay for his college tuition, which is literally the least my dad can do after years of avoiding his own son and his responsibilities. I decided to take my half-brother in for the time being. He's been really depressed about everything and barely even eats or speaks to anyone. He's been saying that he doesn't want to go to college anymore since he feels like he's going to end up becoming a burden on everyone if he decides to go. That's concerning because, from what he's told me, he's a bright kid with a good future ahead of him, and it doesn't make sense for him to quit just because his parents are crappy people. I've tried to talk him into a student loan, but he's not willing to get into that at all. I've even offered to handle his tuition expenses, but he's told me that he can't let me do him anymore. Favors because I'm already going out of my way for a kid I barely even know, which is true, I guess. It's just been 2 weeks, but I feel horrible for him. I know he's my half-brother, but he reminds me of my own son, and I would hate for any kid his age to be going through something so extreme. His whole world has turned upside down in these past 2 weeks, so I can understand where he's coming from. He's lost and overwhelmed. I was feeling bad for him, and he clearly missed his mother as well, so I decided to pay her a visit this morning before I headed to work. I knew that she still lived in the same house, since she'd inherited that from her late uncle, so she didn't need to pay rent, and the fact that it was in a nice neighborhood was just a cherry on top. She was really hostile towards me and didn't invite me inside, but I was okay with that because I wasn't a fan of hers either. I told her that her son was living with me and that he was really upset, so she needed to speak to him urgently, but instead of being concerned for him, she started yelling at me and told me to stay out of her family's business. She accused me of meddling in something that didn't concern me in the slightest and even said that she'd been in the process of arranging the money herself. She just lied to him to protect him from the knowledge that she knew wouldn't sit right with him. She said that her own father was about the same age as my dad, and now that her son knew that his grandfather and father were the same age, he couldn't even look at her the same way, and it had totally ruined their relationship. I'd apparently made a mess of things by telling her son the truth about who his real dad was. She accused me of trying to drive a wedge between her and her son on purpose to get back at her for causing my parents' divorce, which really wasn't even the case. It hadn't even occurred to me that it might come off as that, but even when I denied it, she was adamant and kept blaming me for the situation. She believes that I had no right to tell him the truth even if he had approached me first, and I should have come straight to her instead of trying to deal with the situation myself. Then she slammed the door in my face and left me contemplating everything that I'd done so far because I didn't know if what she was saying was right or not. I'm still at work, but I just can't get what she said out of my head. Aida for telling my half-brother the truth about who his real dad is. It really did help me clear my head because the past few weeks have been tense to say the least. A lot has happened since then, and I haven't yet been able to fully process the situation, but I'll try to explain. After I met my half-brother's mother, I came back home and decided to apologize to him for turning his life upside down, but he reassured me that it wasn't my fault at all and confessed that he'd been on bad terms with his mother for a while now. Ever since he found out the truth, he could barely even bring himself to look at her the same way. Now that he knew what he knew, he didn't know if what I did was okay or not, but he did think that somebody needed to tell him the truth, and he was thankful that I did. Also, the fact that his mother had lied to him about me being his dad was her fault entirely, and that's how I got caught up in this mess, so she really should be blaming herself and not me. If someone threatens to take me to court, then I'm obviously going to tell them the truth and defend myself. Besides, I don't owe it to her to cover up for her either, so her accusations were really baseless now that I think of it. My half-brother and I had a heart-to-heart chat that day, and I made sure that he knew that I was there for him. I even told him that he reminded me of my son and also of myself a little bit. He was overwhelmed and totally broke down when I said that. I think that conversation broke an invisible barrier between us, and he's been a lot more open around us now. He already gets along really well with my son, and my wife loves the kid as well. I can't explain it, but it really feels like our home is complete now. Even my mother agrees that it doesn't feel unnatural at all, and has even offered to pitch in to pay for his tuition. He's supposed to start college in a few months, so the sooner we're able to finalize things, the better it'll be for him. He's still skeptical to let us pay, but if our father doesn't step up, then I'll pay for his tuition myself. That doesn't mean I'll let my dad off the hook, though. He's still been avoiding my calls and messages, so I think he's blocked me. I haven't spoken to my half-brother's mom after that last post, and I don't intend to speak to her either. If she was heartless enough to kick her son out of the house just because he was going through something so difficult and wasn't taking the truth, well, then I don't suppose she'll be willing to be involved in his life anymore either. My half-brother also told me that his mother has blocked him and hasn't he even tried to speak to him, so I think that door is shut right now. My wife and I are looking into lawyers to deal with this situation because it's really complicated and we don't want to take any steps that might hurt our chances of getting my dad to cough up the money that he owes his younger son. We honestly don't even know if we can get him to pay because my half-brother is technically an adult now, and my dad isn't legally bound to do anything for him anymore, but we're still considering legal options. Although I might need to find out why he was comfortable enough to contact his ex, since he did complain about my half-brother's call to his mother. I'm guessing they're still in touch, but I can't figure out why they'd keep in touch if he didn't even want anything to do with his son. I might have to speak to my half-brother's mother soon enough again. But I'm really trying hard to speak to my dad instead because I really don't want to go back to her house and be humiliated yet again. She was loud and crass, and I absolutely don't like her or the kind of person that she is. There's just a lot on my plate right now, and I don't know where to start. Alright, so I went back to my parents' old neighborhood to talk to my half-brother's mother, and thankfully this time, she was more reasonable and didn't accuse me of baseless crap. I guess she regrets the way she's pushed her own son away and wanted to see him again, but knew that she'd have to get through me first. Now that she was pleasant to me this time, I asked her if she'd been in touch with my dad, and she confessed that she had been in touch with him all along. After my parents' divorce, he'd moved to Missouri, and she'd said that she'd raise her son herself. He'd offered to send her a certain amount of money every month to help her out as long as she made sure that he never found out who his real dad was. It wasn't because he was afraid that his youngest son would come around demanding money, but he was more worried about the emotional aspect of it. He just didn't want the burden of having to deal with another kid at his age. So he'd send her money every month as long as he personally didn't have to deal with raising another child and taking up his responsibility. She was okay with this arrangement, but they'd hit a roadblock when it came to college because she demanded that my dad cover his entire tuition fee. My dad wasn't willing to do that, and they were arguing about who would pay for it. My dad obviously stated that he'd been true to his word and had sent the required amount every month religiously, but he couldn't send the entire amount of money needed to cover his son's college expenses up front at once. He could only increase the amount he sent every month, but she wasn't ready to agree to that. That's what they'd been fighting about because they couldn't come to an agreement, and so she'd been really worried about her son's future. My half-brother knew that she'd been struggling with money and was suggesting that he'd take a gap year before college so that she could take her time to arrange the money, but she obviously didn't want that for her son and suggested a student loan for the time being, but he wasn't ready for that. So none of them could agree on anything, and it was leading to a lot of tension in their household. In the meantime, my half-brother had been asking her relentlessly about his real father, and she'd assumed that it was out of curiosity and didn't think much about the consequences, so she told him about me instead of the truth to keep my dad out of the situation. But that backfired pretty badly, and he ended up learning the truth anyway, which is when everything went downhill. My half-brother's call to our dad was the final nail in the coffin. My dad had already been on bad terms with her because of their recent disagreements, and now that she'd broken the one and only rule that my half-brother was never supposed to find out who his real dad was, he cut her off completely and hadn't been responding to any of her messages either. So my dad decided to sever any and all ties with his past life, and it was relatively easy for him since he doesn't live here anymore, but I wasn't going to let him get away with that. After I left, I decided to book flight tickets to Missouri for myself, my mother, and my half-brother's mom. We're scheduled to leave in 3 days. I don't know how my dad's going to react to any of this or heck what I'm going to say to him, but I know for a fact that he's definitely going to have to cough up the amount that he needs to. He's ruined this poor kid's life by being a heartless, cheating jerk, and now he needs to make up for it. Besides, he's almost 80 anyway. I highly doubt he's going to go on adventures with the money he's saved up. My father reluctantly agreed to cover my half-brother's college tuition, transferring half the amount to my bank account shortly after our tense confrontation. The moment my mother, his ex-wife, and I appeared at his doorstep in Missouri, his resistance seemed to crumble. Initially, he threatened to involve the police, his voice sharp with panic, but I quickly countered. I warned that he escalated things. We'd reveal the true, messy reasons behind his return to Missouri. Secrets that could fracture his ties with his local family. The threat of a scandal was enough to make him pause. I reminded him of the pain he'd already caused me, his infidelity, and the chaotic childhood I endured, filled with vivid memories of his shouting matches with my mother, each one leaving a deeper scar. He wasn't going to ruin another child's future. The cycle of neglect and dysfunction had to end with us. Negotiations were grueling, marked by heated arguments and raw emotions. My father's condition for agreeing was harsh. My half-brother could never contact him or acknowledge him as his father. He insisted on a legally binding document to enforce this, which meant navigating a tangle of legal processes. We flew my half-brother to Missouri to finalize everything, a trip that carried its own weight of revelations. Meeting his biological father for the first time, my half-brother was visibly shocked by his age, a stark reminder of the distance between them. He didn't hesitate to sign the agreement, noting that he'd spent his entire 18 years without a father figure and could continue that way, especially with his tuition secured. The deal was done, and we all returned home, exhausted but resolute. Tensions flared again at the airport when my half-brother expressed his desire to stay with me for a few extra days before returning to his mother's house. His mother, already a volatile presence, erupted in frustration, her voice echoing through the terminal. She had her own failings as a parent, lying to her son about his father and even kicking him out at one point, and her outburst seemed futile. My half-brother, now an adult, stood his ground. After a heated exchange, she relented, though her displeasure was palpable. My wife and I welcomed him into our home with open hearts, happy to offer him a temporary refuge as he prepares for college this fall. The aftermath has been a delicate balancing act. My half-brother misses his mother, despite their fractured history, and they are cautiously working to mend their bond one tentative step at a time. I'm no fan of her given her past actions, but I won't interfere with their efforts to reconcile. Our family dynamic is undeniably complex, a web of strained relationships and hard-won resolutions. My father's role, now reduced to a financial obligation, feels like a bittersweet victory. My half-brother's future is brighter, but the emotional cost of these negotiations lingers. Still, I find a strange peace in this chaotic new normal. It's not perfect, but it's ours, and we're navigating it together, day by day, as a family reshaped by tough choices and unexpected alliances.